Welcome back. In a previous video, I've covered August development for Windward. And in this video, I'm going to go more in depth about how I did certain things like transitions and whatnot. If you are a game developer yourself, you're going to find this video fairly interesting. If you are a gamer, however, you might not. Okay, so first up, transitions between different windows. This is actually really easy to do. I've released the code for the windowing framework in the past on the Sharon support forum for Ngui. And I've also used the same code in the Starlink UI kit. So showing and opening of windows is extremely easy. You just say UI window, show, and you pass it a panel, and it will show that panel, automatically hiding whatever was there before. The way to do it is quite simple. Just have a singleton referencing the currently open panel, and when you have a show function, check, is there another one shown already? If yes, then just first hide the one before it and only then open the one you want. This also lets you do things like keep history of whatever you want. So if you were to go to the map menu, then go to the inventory menu, you can then navigate back to the map menu by hitting the go button, the back button. Quite handy and easy to use. Alright, while this window is open, I also have a reference, as I mentioned, a static reference. So it's easy to tell, is this window open or not? Which is what I'm actually doing for the HUD elements. I'm actually hiding the HUD elements while any window is open. Alright, these things. You can see it looks actually quite nice. I've got this icon on the left that highlights when I hover over, and the description of what it is also appears directly to the right. This is really easy to do. What I have is a label here, and this label has a width of just 2, which means that the text there doesn't actually fit, which makes it automatically get clipped. Here you can actually see me dragging it. And this is essentially exactly what I'm doing with a tween. You can see there's a tween here that says I'm going to tween from width of 2 to width of 90. And that's exactly what happens. When I hover over this UI element, notice that the widget simply extends to the right, which makes it appear. The same thing happens with the background as well. The shadow, I simply enlarge it using the tween width. That's it. Really easy and a fairly interesting looking transition. The town menu is a little bit more complicated. These transitions are also done simply using tweens, but there's quite a few of them. If the town has a demand, I spawn one prefab. If the town has a surplus, I spawn a different prefab. These labels here, the buy label or sell label, they're actually localized as well. So it makes it easy to change. Here's the hierarchy for this whole thing. I've got the grid and I've got the resource items underneath, which get created. There's a script that simply references the relevant fields that I want, like the resource name, modifier, and price. Modifier, price, name, and it simply makes it easy to change them. There's also the buy button, so I can react to clicking on the UI element. And as I mentioned, the actual transitions are done using multiple tweens. Here I have several button components which fade in or fade out elements. So by default it just shows one sprite which looks like it's faded out. It's the same sprite also fades out when I hover over, and a different sprite fades in. So it goes from 0 alpha to alpha of 1, thus fading it in. That's how I get a smooth transition rather than just a hard swap. The transitions of, here's the buy button, by the way. Same thing. If I hover over it, you'll see what happens to it. Wrong buy button. Here. You can see its box just moving in. Simple stuff. It's just a tween. So I've got a bunch of different tweens here, and they all have, or most of them anyway, have a group set. Here, tween group 1. Tween group 0, this is just a transition from the hovering states. But here's another tween group 1. Anyway, the idea is simple. The playTween script here, playTween, I specify the group 1, which means that since I have include children clicked, it will start playing all the tweens that have a group of 1 underneath the button game object, which is just several of them. So instead of attaching several UI playTween scripts, I only attach one, specify a group, and I include the children. And that's it. All the tweens are activated on hover exactly as I want them to be. I did not want to use animations for this. I mean, I could have, but I decided not to. It's just something like this is a lot easier to set up using tweens for me. I don't know how it's going to be for you, but just keep that in mind. Simple enough. Next step is the transition between full summed up stats and stats divided into two categories. This is done really easily. I don't just have one label, I have 3 labels. One label you see right now, this is just showing the full stats. When I hover over it, it simply fades out that label and fades in 2 other labels, one with base stats and the other with modified stats. Then the base stats also tween their position from being on the right hand side to being slightly offset. So as I hover over it, it simply gets offset and tweened to the right and faded in. This gives it a nice effect. Tooltips, they're just base tooltips that pretty much come with the GUI. I've simply modified it a little bit so they're not well, they fit in slightly differently, but other than that, absolutely nothing has changed. Of course, now that I said that, I realized nothing has changed in terms of the animation, but the actual tooltip has definitely changed. You can see every tooltip has several fields instead of just one. In base and GUI, it's just text. Here, I've got title text, which is using one font. I've got the text below it, currently that reads standard sales, and then underneath it there are actual stats, and of course the icon for the item itself, and all of this is changed and set dynamically. Here you can see the same exact tooltip is used to display the town information as well. It's an all-purpose tool. I didn't use NGUI's tooltip per se, I just used some of the code from it, which is exactly what I suggest everyone doing as well. Don't use things as is, modify them, especially for something like a tooltip that is likely going to be customized and change with different games. Here I simply have easy to use static function that says show, and I can pass the icon. The color is for the background. That's something I didn't mention. Quality of the items shows up as a different color of the background underneath the icon itself. Anyway, so the color, I got the title text and a description. If the instance is present, meaning the tooltip has been created, I just set it in the awake here. If the tooltip is there, it will just say show now and pass all the information to it. Show now is just right above. It simply sets all the values in the fields that are referenced. I also do some other things like modifying the envelope component, but that's just game specific. Envelope component is something a lot of people don't seem to realize that it exists in NGUI, by the way. It is really easy to use. It's just if you have a bunch of different widgets, you can envelop them using a different widget, like a background or a tinted shadow or something, which is what I'm actually doing here. As I hover over something, the background itself, let me pause it. This background right here is resized based on the contents. So this label is set to resize height, meaning it can extend vertically, but it will never extend horizontally. Since the pivot point is on top right, means it'll always go down, basically. I also happen to have, where is that? Here, envelop content script. That's what I was talking about. I specify the target root being the content itself, which is, well, basically everything you see here. So the background resizes itself using the envelop content script. I simply specify the target and say I want you to be of that size with a little bit of padding, and that's it. I change the content and the background resizes automatically using the envelop content script. Really easy to use. For synchronizing of the data, what I'm doing is also fairly simple. On network join channel is a notification sent by TNet, the network library that I'm using. And if it's successful and I have local data, shouldn't this be not local data? This is a Boolean. I should change that. Anyway, if it's successful and I should be loading the local data, then I'll do exactly that. And then I will put everything into a data node structure. Data node is a hierarchical structure, like something you see in a hierarchy window can be a data node, for example. There's just a bunch of values that have children, that have their own values, and so on and so forth. The idea is quite simple. Anyway, I put everything into a data node, then I use LZMA. Yeah, so I save it, and then I use compression to make it even smaller. This way, it is as small as it can be, regardless of the actual configuration files, because if you look at the actual configuration files, they can be fairly lengthy. In this case, well, 300 lines is not too bad, but like localization, I think it's something like 20 kilobytes now. I mean, it's not a whole lot in today's world, obviously, with the broadband, but still, every bit counts when you're doing a network game, especially if you happen to be paying for bandwidth. Anyway, it's LZMA compressed, and then it is simply sent using a saved mode. If you're not familiar with TNet, it simply means that this function is going to be called on everyone's computer as soon as they join the channel, which means that as soon as they join the game. And in the game, every single zone is a different channel. So what you see here, for example, this is a single zone right here. As players navigate the world and they happen to leave the red margin area, they simply get transferred to a different channel. Every single channel is a different instance, and the channels are basically like in a grid pattern. I have X and Y positions of every single zone in the world, and I use those two values to create a single integer value, which is a channel ID. So as long as you're in the same XY position, you're going to get the same exact channel ID, which means that you're going to get the same exact zone, which means that you're going to join the same channel and see one another. Really simple to do. I mentioned data nodes earlier, and also mentioned the configuration file. Well, the configuration file is basically a data node saved in text form, Data node in TNet, they can be the data itself can be saved in both binary and in text, and you can convert from one to another if you like. Here I've chosen to be saved as text because it makes it easier to see what's going on, and you can modify things. Something you would not be able to do with the just binary format. On the actual game side, when I'm transferring data between players, it is automatically transferred in binary. But when I'm saving on disk, I chose it to be in text. Of course, if you were doing your own game, this would be up to you. You would be able to, choose whatever you want. My point is, it's a good idea to use a structure like this to specify as much data as possible. That makes it easy for players to configure it, which means that they'll be able to mod your game. And modding obviously extends your game's lifetime quite a bit. Here, the configuration file itself is not all that readable. For example, you've got res1, res2, and res3, and so on and so forth, and you don't really know what is this, what does it mean. Well, it's actually quite simple. If you copy this and you go to the localization file and then you try to find it, you will see that it simply corresponds to a text value. This means that localization file does not have to, or configuration file does not have to change when you're doing translations into like German, for example, or French. But the localization file will. So you would add something here. I don't know how to say coal in French, so I'm not going to bother, but it would be like that. Anyway, for the actual saving of the game, I'm not doing anything special at all. I'm just letting TNet do it. So since I'm using remote function calls for just about anything, like for example, to create a town, I would be doing this. I would be saying game town create, specifying what to create, which will result in a creation call be sent to the server and everyone else getting this remote creation call. This is automatically saved on the server because I specified true for persistency, which means that even if the player leaves, the town is still going to be there the next time the player rejoins. TNet is able to save everything that you send to it. So if you say that a function needs to be persistent and the channel happens to be persistent when you create it, then this call will be saved. Now, by default, it can be saved when you stop the server, but you can also do it manually, which is what I'm doing here. I have a global manager that simply saves on exit, saying that game player saves. So this saves the game player, then I disconnect from the server, and I save the server instance, specifying the server file name. I can also save in the middle of the game. Say, for example, when something gets altered, like I place a town on the map, I say global manager save, and it'll just do the same thing. I'll say server instance save to a specific file. So even if the game crashes, I'm not going to lose too much. And this makes it really easy. Like using TNet in this case makes it ridiculously easy to do a game that saves itself, because I don't have to do anything special. I don't have to write any logic that saves save files or anything like that. It's just done automatically for me, and it's nice. And of course, the same exact code is what makes it possible to make the game work in multiplayer. For example, here's a function called adjust HP, hit points. I specify the amount to adjust to the hull and to the sails of the game ship. Here I check, do I own this object? If I own this object, then I'll actually do the work. This means that only the player's owner can modify its own health. So you're not going to run into a situation when you're playing the game and then you get lag and all of a sudden you're dead. It sucks when it happens, right? Well, in this case it's not going to happen because you are the only one who can modify this object. So I basically modify the values and I send the value to everyone else. Here I chose to use a number instead of just the function name, but it is exactly the same. I could have done on set HP instead, and it would work exactly the same. Anyway, this function gets saved on the server, just like everything else, which means that if there are other players there, it'll not only get saved, it'll also get echoed to them right away, and they will get the updated values. And that's the basic idea of TNet. Instead of modifying the value right away, you just send the update to everyone else. Well, in this case, I modify the value and then I send the updated value to everyone else. Same thing. Well, that's about it. If I say any more, I'm gonna get way too in-depth. But if you actually have any questions or want to know how I did certain things, just feel free to ask. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.